What are your thoughts on the concept of return stacking, where products utilize futures leverage to make space for diversifying alternatives, trend following, for example, trend following and carry? Sure. If you're into that kind of thing, I mean, I don't have a super strong opinion on it. We don't use it for clients. Not that interested in starting to use it for clients. Um, People come to us because we manage portfolios in a way that's very, very simple and evidence-based. People that advocate for return stacking might say that it's also evidence-based, but there are levels of evidence that's going to make people mad. I'm sorry. But there are also just the simplicity of the way that we invest with index funds or dimensional funds. It's really easy to communicate to clients. People get it. People want it. And if the market does poorly, the portfolios do poorly, that's it. Having to explain something more complex is just not something that I think we need to do. And you said, Dan, in one of your posts, you were talking about factor investing actually, but you said that, nobody failed to achieve their goals because they didn't have a small cap value tilt or whatever. But I think it's a really insightful statement. And I think about it a lot that we could, maybe we could find some better way to, maybe nothing's going to be guaranteed, but maybe we add in return stacking and we start using futures to get access to other sources of expected return on portfolios. How much is that going to change the expected outcome for our clients? And how much certainty do we have around how it's going to change the expected outcome? No, I don't have enough confidence.
What is the risk that any change might be negative?
It might be negative or might be perceived as negative. Mm-hmm. And what if the clients can't stick with it because they don't understand the strategy, all that kind of stuff. So I don't know. I know this is kind of the hot thing right now, return stacking. It's not actually a new thing. It's portable alpha. It's been around for a long time conceptually. It's being marketed a lot right now, which is fine. And I'm sure the people who make these products are very smart. I follow them online. I like them. But it's just not something that fits with the way that we think about markets or our business model or what our clients want. So those are my thoughts.
I'm good to leave that one there. I don't have a lot of thoughts. The people who are largely involved in that story right now, I want to say Resolve and Corey Hofstein and Rodrigo. Am I thinking about the right thing? Yeah. Those guys are awesome.
They're awesome and they're brilliant.
Yeah.
It's not a knock against them. It's just,
yeah. No, I just want to preface it with that. I have a ton of respect for them and follow it and I've learned a lot from them, but yeah, I agree. Right. I mean, it's more complex. There's additional, risks there. And to your point, are our clients going to fail to achieve to meet the outcomes that they want because they didn't add a bit of leverage to their funds? I don't think so, right?
All right. The plan was to not skip any questions, but this next one's like a 5-part question, so I think we can skip that one, unfortunately.
Sure.
It's just too much. One of the things we try and do when we interview guests is we never have 2-part questions. If you listen to our episodes, very rarely, if ever, do we have 2-part questions because it's really hard to answer them. Mm-hmm. So that question was like 5 parts, and it's not easy to answer.
I'll go to the next one then. Oh, sorry.
Oh yeah, no, I just read the last one. It's not
it doesn't matter. Yeah, okay, I'll read it. Can you speak to the recent changes that Dimensional has made to their vector portfolios? How do they now compare to the approach of a firm like Avantis?
So Dimensional hasn't changed their methodology, but they have changed the emphasis that they're giving to the different factors. So the vector portfolios used to have more of a small cap value tilt. They've changed the methodology to have a more equal emphasis on size, value, and profitability. And that's based on their research that shows that the premiums are not statistically different from each other. And so having an equal emphasis on them gives the best expected outcome, basically. There's no good empirical reason to tilt more towards small cap and value than toward profitability. So they made a bit of a change to the methodology. How does that compare to a firm like Avantis? I think Avantis did have more profitability exposure, so maybe it brings them closer, but overall they still have differences in their methodologies. So the underlying methodologies have not changed. It's just the way that Dimensional's emphasizing different return premiums has changed a little bit.
All right. Should we jump to the next one?
Yep.
This is a good one, actually. I'll read it, but Ben, you'll be the guy to answer it. Much of the public discourse involving factor investing seems to concern equities exclusively. Yet, are there equivalents for bonds and fixed income? For example, risk factors such as maturity, term length, credit rating, etc. How should individual investors consider such factors for bonds, bills, and credit holdings?
Yeah, I mean, it's the expected returns overall are lower in fixed income, so I think they get a little bit less attention. But we did an episode with the head of fixed income from Dimensional, Dave Pleka. We also did our own episode on factor investing in fixed income. I don't remember which episode numbers those were, but you can go and look them up. So I mean, there's something there. Like there's good evidence on a term premium. There's good evidence on a credit premium, although a little dicier maybe on credit, depending on how you look at it. There are funds now, like from Avantis, and I think Dimensional now has ETFs too that are available that do this. They have broadly diversified fixed income portfolios that do put emphasis on return premiums within the fixed income space. Do you need that? Again, I mean, I love Dan's point about is anyone going to fail to achieve their goals because they didn't have a tilt toward credit in their portfolio? Probably not. I think simplicity is super important. But I mean, listen, it depends how much each individual wants to optimize their portfolio, how confident they are in the return premiums. I don't know how much time they dedicate to it, but we use, like in our portfolios where we're using Dimensional funds, they do tilt toward different fixed income factors at different times. That's one of the, I guess, unique things with fixed income is that the tilts change over time. The cash flow side of fixed income is much more certain than with equities, which it makes you a little bit more confident that differences in expected returns are all about, or differences in prices are all about discount rates. And so Dimensional does vary their exposure to longer and shorter maturity bonds, and they vary their exposure to different credit rating bonds based on prices. So we use funds to do that. Do you need that? I mean, I don't know. So how should individual investors consider such factors? I mean, if you want to pursue them, there are products that do it. Do you need them to meet your goals? Probably not. PWL does use funds that do consider factors in fixed income. Anything from you guys?
Not really.
No, I don't think so.
All right. Oh, I love this question. How do you explain the discrepancy between past results are no guarantee for future predictions? I don't know if that's what it means to say, but I think people know what I'm talking about. Versus the stock market had returned 7% on average per year, and we'll use that to predict your money's growth for the coming 20 years. Feel free to rephrase. Yeah. So, I mean, I think the question is like, how do we square the statement of past returns are not a guarantee of future results, which is kind of standard disclosure in financial services? How do you square that with thinking that we're going to get positive returns from the stock market going forward? I mean, the first thing that I would say is the stock market had returned 7% per year. We'll use that to predict your money's growth for the coming 20 years. That's not how we do it at all. So that's the first comment I would make. We at PWL look at the global average across all stock markets and make some adjustments for valuations. We net out the portion of return that comes from historical valuation changes. We also apply a portion of our estimate that comes from the current valuation of stocks. So when stock valuations are really high, our expected return estimate is going to be a little bit lower. So we do make some adjustments, I think, to try and be conservative. And we also look at all stocks across stock markets across the world, including markets that have failed and closed, to try and not have an upward biased estimate. Yeah, I mean, that's one piece of it. And then that statement is like a regulatory disclosure. So I don't know if we need to square anything we say with it, but I think the general idea that how can we look at past returns of anything and think that it has information about the future, a big part of it is why did that happen? So there's theory behind that. Stocks should be riskier than bonds, and that makes sense logically, theoretically, and empirically all around the world. So directionally, the idea that a riskier asset should have higher expected return, I think we have pretty good reason to believe that. As a point estimate, though, like, can you look at historical returns and say that's what you're going to get in the future? No, I don't think that's the case at all. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think, like, in my view, it's not a prediction about what your money is going to do over the next X number of years. Is that we need to make reasonable financial planning assumptions, right? And I think, Ben, the description of how you arrive at PWL's financial planning assumptions is just that's the best way that we are aware of to come up with what we believe to be a reasonable assumption. And that's our starting point for financial planning. But then we also do all sorts of stress testing and scenario testing. And so
Right.
I don't think at any point I've ever told a client, I predict this is going to happen. It's more, these are the assumptions we're using in this plan. We can look at different assumptions. We can look at what if your portfolio is more conservative or more aggressive, or inflation's higher, or, run Monte Carlo analysis. But it is largely true that past performance doesn't predict future returns. And that type of disclosure and compliance statement, I think, also applies more specifically to like very specific products, more so than it does to general financial planning assumptions, right? Like if you see a fund fact sheet or something like that about a whatever it is, technology sector ETF, and it's done 18% annualized for 10 years, there's a reason that disclosure is there, is because you can't just assume that that's going to happen in the future. And a lot of people would be sued without that disclosure. So I think that's more product specific, whereas what we're doing, I think, is more financial planning specific.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, I think that you hit exactly it, Mark, is that, if you're as a financial planner, you have to use assumptions, right? I mean, you can't, what are you doing if you're not going to apply some sort of assumptions? And then so the question becomes, your assumptions just have to be as reasonable as possible, and you have to be able to back them up, right? If you're going to pull a number out of the air and say stocks are going to return 10% a year, you need to be able to defend that, and it's hard. And I will say, like, PWL now does a really good job, I think, at its expected returns assumptions and the methodology. And I know, Ben, you're intimately involved in doing this, and maybe you want to share a little bit about that experience compared to the way other organizations do it, which may be better or worse, I don't know. But I think I've been very impressed with the way PWL has come up with a methodology, and we update it twice a year. We use those updates in our financial plans, and I feel very confident, using them for clients for sure, which I've definitely seen other return assumptions that seem a little bit, let's just call them optimistic.
Yep. I think it's getting better. Like we have FP Canada has been issuing expected return assumptions for a while now. I'm on that committee now. This year is my first year there. We did make some changes to move a little bit more toward what PWL does, just including some input from market valuations, which I think are really, really important. But yeah, building the PWL methodology was a great experience. That's something that I spent a ton of hours with, working with Ray Cruzeiro at PWL, just figuring out we needed something simple that we could explain to clients, but that gave us good information about expected returns. It took current market conditions into account. And so I like our methodology a lot. I think it's easy to explain, gives reasonable estimates, and responds to changes in the market, which I think are all important characteristics for expected return assumptions. But there are lots of organizations out there now that have, I think, reasonable enough expected returns that are published. Like BlackRock has them, Vanguard has them. Conquest Planning, the financial planning software that we use, gives us access to a set of assumptions as well, if we didn't want to use our own. And they're all within the same kind of range. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's much different from, using 10% a year, which unfortunately I think some people are still doing.
Yeah. Okay. Next one. Do you know some tax exempt ETFs? If yes, what are the pros and cons? It's difficult to find ETF with a built-in capital loss, only return of capital or reinvested distributions, low turnover, and less actively managed. So I think what this question, and this is from Gerald. It's a French name. I don't know how to say that with a French accent. Jahal. I don't know. I think what he's probably talking about is corporate class funds, which I don't know if you've talked about that much on the podcast, Ben, or if anybody has. But
yeah, it's probably one version of. I don't know what you might have been talking about. There's a few ETFs that have launched recently that are like anti-dividend ETFs that aren't holding any dividend stocks to try and be more tax efficient. I don't know about tax-exempt ETFs though.
It could be the total return ETFs by Horizons or now Global X, or just corporate class funds in general that try to wipe out any taxable distributions.
Yeah, it could be that.
Yeah. I don't have a ton of experience with them, but I think he's mentioning it's difficult to find an ETF with a built-in capital loss. So I think what he's talking about is usually a mutual fund is a trust, and it can be organized as a corporation where the fund or all of the funds that are within that corporation can have gains and losses or income and losses offset against each other. So you might have fund A that's lost a lot of money, and then fund B that's gained a lot of money, and those losses and those gains can offset such that the taxable investor isn't required to pay tax on the income or gains of the fund. So those are called corporate class funds. I think, like, on the surface, those are really interesting in some cases, but I think there's a trade-off because there's not really a lot of options in that space, and most corporate class funds are actively managed high fee funds. So what you might gain in tax efficiency, you might lose elsewhere. There is the Global X funds or Horizons funds, which they've undergone some changes, but I think primarily, and Ben, you know more about these than I do, but I think primarily now the tax efficiency comes from the corporate class structure, not from their old structure. So I don't know if you want to talk about those funds, but.
Yeah, and I think you have to be careful with corporate class in general because they can, and Mark, I think you and I looked at a case of this recently where a corporate class fund can look more tax efficient because of the distributions that it pays out to you as the fund investor. But the fund corporation can actually end up paying quite a bit of tax at the fund level. And when you combine the two layers of tax together, corporate class can actually look less tax efficient in some cases than just owning the ETF on its own. With the Horizons Total Return Fund specifically, they are still using a total return structure. So their returns are coming from fully taxable derivative income inside the corporate class. And they have a big loss carry forward, which they can use to offset net taxable income in the fund. They banked some serious losses during COVID by realizing swap contracts. But as that loss pool kind of gets smaller and smaller over time, the risk with those funds is that if there's net income in the fund, so if the fund corporation has to pay tax on net income, which just means like the index, the swap contracts are positive because the indexes have gone up, and the fund corporation has to realize the income on one of the swap contracts. That net income is taxed inside the fund and then allocated pro rata to the fund that was kind of responsible for it. And because of the way a mutual fund corporation is taxed, when you net out all of the numbers, it's possible for you to end up worse off for having invested in that corporate class fund than having just held the underlying assets in a mutual fund trust. For different types of income, the threshold for that is different. Mark Soth did a series of blog posts on this that I thought were really good. Him and I kind of worked on thinking through those products together. But our position on them right now is that we're not super comfortable with the risk of that net income happening inside the fund. And we're also just a little worried about the, I don't know, longevity of that structure. And I know, Dan, you and Justin talked about this years ago when they had the previous structure before the tax changes forced them to switch to a corporate class. And you guys kind of had the same position, which really kind of influenced how we thought about it back then. And I think now with the current structure, it's a different set of risks, but we're still not comfortable with it.
Yeah. Anytime you layer on some, tax efficient structure, given the climate in Canada regarding eliminating perceived tax shelters, which are typically assumed to benefit only the wealthy. It just seems like these are in the crosshairs of government. We've just seen it over and over the last 15 to 20 years. Who knows, right? Whether such a structure will survive, but it does seem at least possible. that this structure could eventually be eliminated by legislation, and then you're in a situation where you might have forced liquidation of the fund, and it's just, again, one less thing to worry about. So far, it's worked out extremely well. I will have to say, anybody who's owned the formerly Horizons, now Global X funds for the last 10 or 15 years has deferred a lot of tax, especially on the US side. But, look, US equities right now, what's the yield is less than 2%. So you're not really paying all that much tax on distributions from a traditional US index fund right now. Most of the gains has been capital gains, even in a traditional ETF structure. So I'm not sure how beneficial it actually is going to be going forward.
And they have funds for international stocks and bonds too, which again, like, the case gets stronger, but the risk still doesn't go away, because
for sure.
The problem is the total return. In the event of net income, there's potential for the total return to be taxed as income inside the fund, as opposed to the mix of capital gains and foreign dividends or interest that you would have had as an individual. And so there is a possible outcome where that ends up being less tax efficient. And there's also a possible outcome where if that becomes an issue, that these funds, like you mentioned, Dan, could close down, which can cause other problems. Well, that probably wouldn't happen. They'd probably just switch to being a regular fund at that point. But in any case, it's, again, is it going to be the difference between our clients meeting their goals or not? Probably not. Does it introduce additional complexity and risks that we'd have to worry about and the client would have to worry about? Yes. Does it make sense for some people? Sure. I mean, I know Mark South is a fan of them still, despite understanding their risks. But him and I have talked about this, and we kind of agree that it's very different for an individual to say, yeah, I'm comfortable with these risks, than for a firm like PWL to tell our clients, yes, we are comfortable with these risks. Those are two completely different animals. Next one we can skip because it's very specific to a U.S. account type.
Well, can I ask it and I'll spend 10 seconds on it?
Oh, sure. If you have.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting answer that's going to be general enough that could be useful to listeners. But so the question is, how would you invest the TSP? In parentheses, it's Thrift Savings Plan. It's the federal government's type of 401k. And this is from Keith from Connecticut. So a 401k is kind of like almost like a group RSP. I think it's like an employer-sponsored tax deferral plan in the U.S. And I've never heard of the Thrift Savings Plan, but it sounds like it's relatively equivalent. And without getting into the nuances or technicalities of how these accounts work, I just thought it'd be interesting to, or at least maybe useful to think from a framework of how we allocate assets or investments to our portfolios. And I think about it as, I think about my portfolio first and then what buckets to use later, right? And not the opposite. So we've talked about like asset location, Ben, and I know you've done a lot of work on this, but if a 401k type plan or a thrift savings plan is a retirement asset, then it follows the same guidelines as the rest of my retirement assets in terms of how I invest them, right? So again, I don't know anything about the thrift savings plan, so maybe this is a terrible answer, but I would honestly, if it's in that retirement bucket, I'm investing it the same way as all my other retirement funds.
I'm too nervous to know nothing about the account type and say something that doesn't mean anything. So you're.
Oh yeah, you could be like, no, actually, it doesn't work this way, and your answer is dumb, and maybe that's true. But I just think because I get this question in a different way a lot of the times, like how would you invest this versus like this type of account versus that type of account? Look, it's all fungible. Like it's all one pot of money for me in retirement. The tax treatments are going to be different, but I'm not going to make different portfolio decisions based on that. I'm allocating everything that's in the retirement bucket gets invested the same way. And then I choose which buckets, whether it's TFSA, RSP, or what have you, to put that in. But the portfolio for me doesn't change based on the type of account. And maybe there's some nuance on US plans that make that answer terrible, but that's how I think about it.
Yep. Anything to add, Dan?
No, I think that's the right approach. I mean, I remember back when TFSAs were first launched and people would ask questions like that. What should I invest in my TFSA? And it's like, well, what are you investing in the rest of your portfolio? And it took us a while to realize, asset location considerations do need to be considered, but these are not fundamental questions. Like you're not gonna use different strategies or hold fundamentally different funds necessarily depending on the account type. It's important to think of the portfolio as a whole when making any decision like that.